Silence is my cue. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This is a few wee stories about culture, spelt with a capital K. So I hope you enjoy it. Complex cultures. Nogo, Tindi, Wali, and Igini. They're pigs, land, women, and men in the Huli language, which is probably the second largest language group in Papua New Guinea. I have to forewarn you, there's some images here. There's some images that you might find really, really nice if you like bare-breasted ladies. There's some of those coming up. So close your eyes if you don't like bare-breasted ladies. Okay. Nogo, Tindi, Wali. I've left the men off because they just about control everything, but they're in the orders of significance of Papua New Guinea. Unfortunately, ladies, you come at the end of the line. Pigs are the most important thing because that's their main currency. Land, obviously, is very, very important, and women are a result of pigs and land, really, the way they do things. They're the cause of most arguments in that order as well. So fortunately, the women aren't argued about as much as pigs and land are. But I'll just move into this gentleman here that I'm talking to, Hogogo, the guy over there with a little grey beard. He is a very, very significant man. He's actually got 8 wives. Morag was nearly his 9th wife when we went to visit. But he's got 8 wives, and he achieved his significance by buying bodies. And what he would do, he would actually repatriate deceased people from wherever they were back to their homeland. And and generally it was women that were married out of the clan. So he would hear that somebody had died. He'd grab 2 or 3 of his trusty fellows, 2 or 3 little pigs, and take off and find the deceased, bind them up, and they would carry the deceased back to their homeland, and he would give a couple of pigs to the family where she well, generally as a woman, where she was. Then, when he got the body back to that area, the family would be obviously grieving, but they would compensate him for bringing the body back. Generally, it was with more pigs than he'd handed out. So that's how he made his living initially. In Papua New Guinea, there's an expression that there is no such thing as an empty billum. A string bag is a billum. And when you look at it, you can look through it, it's clear, it appears that there's nothing in it. But if you're given a billum, and you accept that billum, you actually have created an obligation between you and the giver. And it's your obligation to repay that in some way or another with a tiny little bit of extra value.
This is the bridge. More exercise, more exercise, more exercise. Attention, first aid response. First aid response. Assessment team proceed to the aft mooring deck, deck 1, reserve 1. Instant type fire. I repeat, assessment team proceed to the aft mooring deck, deck 1, reserve 1. Instant type fire. For exercise purposes only.
Thank you, Bridge. Anyway, where was I? Oh, no such thing as an empty billum. So the billum is given as an obligation, and that's repaid and back and forth. It goes back and forth, and over time the obligations get bigger and bigger and bigger. The other day, and I'll touch on it again a little bit later when I talk about using your eyes. There's no written languages at all in Papua New Guinea. So everything has to be done through song or story or what you see. And this is how you can tell the wealth of somebody. See, this is like a sporran. There's Hogogo with his sporran there. This is a sporran. And those things hanging off there are pig's tails. So therefore, to be able to have a sporran with that many pig's tails, you've got to be quite a wealthy person, because to get the pig's tail, you have to kill the pig. And so consequently, that's a display of the wealth of the individual that's wearing it. What's happened in Papua New Guinea in the last 30 or so years is that they've introduced goats into the diet, and a lot of white-skinned goats end up as pseudo pig's tails. So you've got to be careful what you're looking at. You could be looking at a whole pile of slices of goat skin rather than pig's tails. When they kill a pig, if you have a look, you can, I hope you can see it, this right arm of the person with the drum here, he's got a big bracelet on, that's made from wood. But just in front of there, there's three little bracelets. Those little bracelets are actually the urethra from pigs that they've killed. So he's killed pigs. When they slaughter the pig and open them up, they actually cut the urethra out, tie it around the wrist, and that displays that he's just killed a pig and his wealth. And over time, that urethra just turns into a very hard black bracelet. We had major problems with that because, again, as you say, if you look at somebody and you can see these on the wrist, you know that they're a wealthy person. We had a lot of young men with what looked like black bracelets. It turns out that they were going to the 44-gallon drums that were on the end of the airstrip, providing fuel for the aeroplanes, opening them and taking the rubber seal out and putting it on their wrists. All very pretty. Unfortunately, the rubber seal was to stop the water getting into the 44-gallon drum that you were supposed to be putting into the aeroplane. So checking that there was no water in the fuel that you were pumping into an aeroplane was very, very, very important. But when we were in an outstation that I spent 6 months in this place, and I'd go out very, very early on a Monday, and I'd leave very late on a Friday and go and spend the weekend, hopefully, with Morag and the baby. But in this particular area, they had a famine, and as a result of that, they weren't growing any sweet potato, so they had to kill the pigs. So they had a big pig kill here, and it slaughtered all the pigs. And as you can see, they butchered them straight away and then took all that meat immediately into an earth oven, and they cook all their food under the ground. But there you go, this guy here, he's digging out the urethra, ready for later on. But there's a lot of pigs being killed there, and they had a major feast. I'll tell you a little story about what happens with uncooked pork in Papua New Guinea a little bit later on. But that is basically the process. Now, just on the other side of this major mountain range, near Mount Hagen, they have a thing called a Moka Ceremony. When you've built up all these obligations through life, and you become a very, very important person, and you're getting near the end of the road, what you do is, like any good philanthropist, Mr. Gates, you actually give away your wealth. And that's what's happening here, is that the big chief in this area, he's gotten together and he's called in all of his obligations, every single obligation he has. He's brought them all in, plus his own personal wealth, and it's all out there on display. Now, alongside all these pigs, and there's some pretty big pigs there, he would lay out all the kina shells that he's earned or gotten back in repayment of all these obligations. So he gets the entire lot in and obviously displays it to everybody. This is my enormous wealth. Thank you very much indeed. Now give it all away. So he gives the whole lot away. So in actual fact, at the end of the Moka ceremony, he's got nothing, absolutely nothing. He's got mountains and mountains and mountains of new obligations, but nothing physical. And he's not interested in anything physical because he's at the end of the road and all he wants to do is live a very peaceful, happy retirement. And what happens is that anybody that sees him, if he's looking for some sweet potato, they give it to him. If he fancies a chicken, they'll give it to him. So he does absolutely nothing because he's got nothing, but he doesn't have to pay for anything. It just comes to him at the end of the day. So that's what happens in this particular area. It's quite common in other areas as well, in giving their wealth away. It's one of the jobs that Morag and I do in our real life, is we counsel high net worth individuals on how to give their money away efficiently and effectively for their purposes. That's an extension of our fundraising business. But you've seen this picture before this is to do with land and land allocation. Let's say there was a village on the ridge here in the centre of the picture, and the other village is way up on that ridge on the top left. But that shows you the land is divided by this ravine through here. So this is up in the Finisterre Ranges behind Madang. Very, very mountainous area, very severe mountains, all limestone and everything else. However, further up in the highlands, they've got these large open valleys, extremely fertile areas. So this is one of the reasons why the population in the highlands is greater, because of all of this extensive cultivation. You can see here there's sweet potato gardens all throughout that area. That's all hand dug.
Or exercise, or exercise, or exercise. The general emergency alarm signal is about to be sounded for exercise purposes only.
Okay. As you can see, it's an extremely...
The signal you just heard was the general emergency alarm signal and was sounded for exercise purposes only. No action is required from our guests and crew at this time. So I repeat, no action is required from guests and crew.
Thank you, Bridge. Extensive cultivation. So because they've got lots of people there, they obviously have a lot of land boundaries. A lot in the highlands areas, what they do is they actually dig huge ditches between people's land. It might be maybe 5 metres wide and could be 7 metres deep. These massive ditches that they dig around the place that delineate between land boundaries. I mentioned Manam Island before. We looked after Manam Island. On this particular place, they have a chieftaincy system that's very, very reminiscent of a medieval system, where you've got the paramount chief, and each village has got its chief, and then it tapers down from there. And it's hereditary. The paramount chief is all-powerful. They own everything, including the people, and as a result of that, it doesn't matter whether if the paramount chief is as thick as a brick, he's still the chief, and you've got to do what he says. In this particular island, at the time I was there, the most powerful person on the island was actually his uncle, who had been away and worked on plantations and got a bit of outside knowledge. But this is the the map, these are the patrols that I did when I was there. And there's 16 little villages there. The big gap down the bottom right-hand side of the map is where the lava flow was. And every time there was an eruption, they would end up with a lava flow in this particular area. So obviously nobody built the village there. But each of those villages had a chief who had to pay a tithe or whatever to the main chief, and everybody had to, the villagers had to give their food and everything to that chief in the village, who would then give back to them what was theirs to consume. If you recall way back in one of the presentations I made about the birds of paradise and the video that you should try and get hold of when you get home, David Attenborough and the birds of paradise, inside that set of DVDs is a video about going to try and map and locate people in an obscure, isolated area. Guess who this is?
And so eventually we had to cross it. At this point, it was just possible for one man, without a load, to swim across. But to get the whole party over, we had to build a bridge. The New Guinea forests most generously provide you with everything you need for the construction of a first-rate suspension bridge. Primarily, kanda, a kind of long, straggling cane that grows throughout the forest, draping itself over trees and along the ground like a carelessly laid cable. It grows, astonishingly, into lengths up to 500 feet long, and it's as strong as any rope. 3 lengths bundled together will form the basic cable on which to put our feet. 1 on either side will serve as handrails, and the whole contraption will be tied together with string made from splitting kanda. This kind of bridge is only made by mountain people. Most of our patrol came from the swamps and plains around Ambunti and had no idea how to do it. Indeed, they regarded the whole operation with about as much mistrust as I did myself. But 3 of our men were true hillmen, and they immediately took over the direction of operations.
"106 carriers, quite apart from ourselves, have got across that bridge. 106 sounds an absurdly, almost ludicrously large number. But the basic calculation is this: if one man carrying nothing, or carrying just a tent or trade salts or a radio, is going to survive in the field for a fortnight, he needs 2 other men carrying nothing but food to provide him with food and them with food. If you want to stay longer than a fortnight in the field, as we do, well, you've either got to arrange for an airdrop, or else you've got to live off the country. We can't live off the country because there are very few people here. And anyway, turning up for dinner with 106 porters is hardly a way to endear yourself. Or else, of course, we could stop. We're planning to get an airdrop. But first, we've got to cross this river.
That was made in 1971. So as I say, the video is called A Blank on the Map, and it's part of the Birds of Paradise one. highly recommend if you can get these DVDs and have a look, because the whole program about the blank on the map is very, very intriguing. And you'll get to see a little bit more about the type of work I had to do when I was up there. But we'll get on to a little bit about women now, mainly about bride price. To get a wife, you actually have to buy them, and you have to provide some sort of wealth. And generally in the Highlands, it's with kina shells. Now, when Morag was in the main centre, patiently waiting for Craig to be born, I was given a job to go off and do a bit of a stock take in our government stores. And way back in the storeroom, I found 2 crates of kina shells. They were fresh kina shells. They weren't made into the bottom right-hand picture. They were the top left and the top right. They're raw kina shells. And I found 2 big boxes of these, and I thought to myself, well, I'll get those shipped back to where I was at the patrol post, because an area of land that I was involved in had only been visited. The first whites had been in 1963, and this was 1973. So what I wanted to do was to try and break the nexus of the rich men in this particular area, because they were all powerful and everything went through them. And they were buying 6, 7, 10 wives. Unfortunately, the wives that they were buying were like 12-year-old girls. And what I wanted to do was to start paying the guys for road works and building motorcycle tracks and doing a whole pile of other things with the kina shells, so that they could actually have what was needed to buy a bride. I also gave them instructions that they weren't allowed to take a wife until the young girl had had at least 12 periods. And at the end of that time, then she was mature enough to become a wife, and preferably another 12 on top of that would be even better, because there were a lot of deaths of young girls that were pregnant and weren't capable of carrying a child. So this is what we did with these kina shells. As an aside, underneath our house in Como, I got some of these shells, and I got a Makita toolkit and a sanding disc, so I thought that I'd very quickly clean these shells up and make them more valuable. So I cleaned up the calcium on the top left hand there. You take that calcium off the outside, and then you end up with this on the bottom right. What you see them wearing is not the inside of the shell, but the outside of the shell, this bottom right picture. So I thought, well, I'd do that. So I cleaned off all the calcium over the outside, a really nice looking shell. Then I had to cut, you can see the top right there, where the hinge of the shell is. I had to cut that out to form up the image on the bottom right. So I got a jigsaw out, and I'm carving away trying to cut this shell, and I couldn't put the shell in a vise. If I put the shell in a vise, it would just smash. So one of the labourers, I said, come over here and hang on to this shell, and I'll just get the saw out. So he stood there and he held onto this shell with 2 hands like this, and I got the jigsaw and I cut him round, pushing as hard as I could. Eventually I cut out the bit of shell. I said, you can give me the shell now. He opened his fingers and the shell was stuck. It actually embedded in the calluses of his both hands, and he had the shell stuck in his hands. And he didn't blink, no blood, but it was just amazing seeing him standing there with his shell sticking out of his hands. So that's the sort of thing that they do with the kina shells in the Highlands. But on the coast, in the Gazelle Peninsula and Rabaul area, they actually use these tiny, tiny little shells, and they string them on a piece of, well, for the want of a better word, a bamboo. And this old lady here is actually drilling a hole in the shell and threading them on. And most of these shells that they've got here have actually come from the Solomon Islands. They buy these tiny shells from the Solomon Islands in large coffee tins, and they spend all their time making these things. Now, the length of the shell is called a fathom, and it's actually 3 foot long, and everything is done in sections of 3 foot long. And so a bride, to buy a bride, you had to have a minimum of 400 fathoms to pay for the bride. Now, you could go to the market, and I'll show you a picture. You can buy a fathom of these shells for 5 kina. So we're talking about 20,000 kina, roughly, is for a bride. But however, when somebody accumulates their wealth, that's all those shells in this ring here, like a big car tyre, huge. So when somebody dies, they actually accumulate all of these shells. They've been doing it over time. When somebody dies, they then just give them away again. So this is what you could buy in the markets. You can buy a little fathom, 3 foot long. So each little bundle is worth probably about 20 kina in there. But when somebody dies, you're going to pay back the obligations. This is the sort of thing that happens. People, the rest of the family, they all gather in, and they bring in these big loops. Each of those is 6 foot long, so there's 2 fathoms, and then each of the strands in there's probably 40 strands, 40, 50 strands in each bundle. So they just accumulate all of this together and hand it over to the deceased family to repay all the obligations that they've accumulated. I mentioned the other day about the number of children that the person has, is the different levels on the grass skirt. So you can see that's there. Now, one of the most amazing places is the Trobriand Islands. And if you come back at 2 o'clock, you'll see a beautiful young lady singing. I'm going to make a presentation at 2 on her. She's from the Trobriand Islands. What they have there is 2 things: very unique social welfare system and a unique banana. And the banana leaf is what they use to make money, Doba. And what they do is they take a board. Now this board has got a unique design on it that belongs to one woman. And you can see on the left, there's the banana leaves, and they've been put on this board and scraped. And that belongs to, as I say, belongs to that individual woman. Now, usually it's a widow. And what the widow does is she sits and she makes this doba. She makes the money out of banana leaves. And then the banana leaves dry, and they put them together in a bunch. And a bunch of banana leaves, or 5 bunches, is a unit, one of the units that they use. So this is to help, this is the social welfare system where the woman makes her money, because she can't work, she can't get the yams from the garden or whatever, and she makes it from the banana leaves, accumulates that together, and then she uses the banana leaves to pay for a chicken or cooking pot or whatever it might happen to be. This is an old lady making doba.
This is, and so what would you get with 1 leaf? Like, if she gave 1 leaf to me, what would I have to give her? Or it's hard to explain, or? Yes. Which is like chickens or yams or is it like
Now you can see the pattern is under her hand, so she's actually run that over the board. Under her hand is her pattern. There's her board under there. Now that's unique to her, that particular board and everything. So what happens is that she uses the banana leaves to buy things, and the person that sells it to her puts it in their house, and they keep it separate from everything else. Now when that lady dies, her board is burnt. So the design is burnt, which then makes every single banana leaf that she's ever produced irrelevant. So what then happens is they collect all these banana leaves together and they burn them. So therefore there's no, they can't resell them, they can't reuse the banana leaves. If I give somebody a chicken, they give me banana leaves, I can't give those banana leaves to anybody else. So this is their whole social welfare system. And it's all predicated on these things, yams. Now if a woman has got a lot of sons, she can end up becoming a very, very rich woman. They're a matrilineal society, so the women are the bosses. And in these yam houses, there's a variety of yams, different species of yams in there. And actually inside the yam house, there's an intricate system where they've put pillars inside and they can only eat the yams from certain areas. So that actually lasts them 12 months to move through all those yams. And this is what happens there when a man dies. They bring all of these yams from all their other yam houses and give it to the woman, because the woman is now destitute. She's a widow. She's got nobody to help her other than making the Doba money, and she has to, she keeps all of these yams that have been given to her deceased husband. So that's the way that whole system works on this island. One of the things that they are doing on this island is they're keeping their culture alive. Now, this video here, so these are the young girls actually being taught their traditional dances. So they're the young girls there, that's their dance class. We actually went to this village and with a bunch of Croatian tourists, and they actually put the show on for them because they'd been at school going through the whole process of their culture, and just coincidentally the tourists arrived and they got to see all of these displays. These are the boys. So they're the boys doing their dance classes. Now, about 12 months later, Morag and I just happened to be on a ship with the president of Carnival Australia, and the mother of the young lady that you're going to see singing later on organised to have a real big display for the president of Carnival Australia, because they're actually trying to set up a major cultural attraction for cruise ship passengers outside of where they normally go. This is a major one. So these are the adult young men dancing. Two girls in there. We were told that those young girls are very brave dancing with the boys because they actually have to kick the legs up, and it's very unusual for seeing young girls in there. However, these are the young girls from the women from this village.
No, it's okay.
all of those costumes actually mean something. There's everything to do with the shells, and the actual story of that particular individual woman is written in what they're wearing. It's too complicated for me to explain, and I would have to leave the image up there all the time to actually go through it, and I'm sure you don't want to be standing looking at that all the time. So we now move on to the initiations area. So this particular place here, that's our sons Craig, and there's Morag up there in the top left. And this was supposed to be a living museum that they'd built. And this is where all the young initiates would meet, and then they would actually go to this building, which is it's just a knocked up little thing. And all the initiates would go, accumulate at the back end, the right-hand end there, where it's very low. And this is what it looks like from the other side, and that's the exit. So the initiates would go into the back area there, and to get in, they obviously have to put their heads down. Inside there, all the men, initiated men, they've got switches of bougainvillea, nettles, whatever, any kind of things that are going to cause pain. And the boys come out the front there and they run the gauntlet between all of the men, and they get beaten by the men, and they come out the other end quite relieved, and that's just the start of their initiation. They're accumulated, and then they go off into the bush for probably 18 months, where they live with initiated men, and they get all the rites of passage given to them for that period of time. One of the things that they do when they're there is they grow their hair. Now they're actually put on, I suppose you could call it a hairnet type thing on their heads before their hair starts growing. So they've got this on their heads, the hair grows through, and these two guys here are actually putting sacred water onto the hair to make the hair grow. And as time goes by, the hair gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's quite fluffy, but to actually form a wig, it has to be compressed so that it doesn't fall to bits. So over time, it gets compressed and compressed, and then eventually they'll shave underneath the hairnet and lift the whole wig off. So that wig belongs to that individual, and it fits them perfectly. So these are daytime wigs that they're making there. So over time, they'll end up wanting to make the wig on the right-hand side, so they go through the whole process again. And all of that is all human hair. Those wigs are human hair. But in a lot of areas in Papua New Guinea, they use scarification as tattoos or whatever. And this is how they identify them. This actually is scarification on a woman on the coast. Up in the Bosavi area, this is the house that they live in. Huge house, and I'll explain a bit more about how that house is built and what's inside of it in my next presentation. But these are the men from that area. Now, they don't normally dance outside of the building. They just got dressed up so that I could film them. Normally, they dance during the night, and they dance inside the building. And their dancing is simply going side to side. They don't go back and forth, they go side to side. The reason they go side to side is because this dancing is taking place inside the house, and they have to move up and down inside the house. And this is what they look like. There's a still photograph with all of his gear on, getting ready for a ceremony. Now, if you have a look at his back, you see all the keloid scars on the shoulders. Now, what's happened is that they've gone into the house. This is the house. On the right-hand image, if you can just see a light-coloured roof, that's the patrol officer's house there. So you can see the difference in the size. They're huge. So they've gone into the house to dance, and they dance up and down, beat their drums. Now, in this particular area, they've got a tree where they collect the resin from a tree, just like a rubber tree. They collect it in cones that are made up of banana leaves, and this resin goes into the cone, And they collect those, and that solidifies, just like pine resin. So that solidifies. And what they do is they trade those cones up into where the wigmen are, and the wigmen get those cones, solid cones, they warm them up, and that turns into oil, the sap of the tree, and then that is the oil they put on their body to make their body shiny. And they exchange shells and the like with these people. Now, at the same time, these cones and these are full of this solid resin. At night time when they want to light, they just set fire to the end of it, and it burns quite well. This resin just burns. So they're dancing away in the house, up and down, and the mothers are inside the house, and they've got these cones of light, and the guys are dancing up and down. And they're singing about the trees and the creeks and the mountains and all nice things. And they work themselves into a frenzy and a bit of a trance. And as they're dancing up and down, they'll spot their mother. And they dance towards their mother. And the mother has a torch in either hand, and she'll step forward and she'll go whack and puts these torches out on their shoulders. And that's how these scars end up, because they cover them with all the blisters are there, and they cover them up with ashes. And then he goes back to dancing. He wakes up out of his trance, goes back to dancing. He'll go back into a trance again. In the meantime, Mum's gone off and lit these two torches again, and she's standing there dancing up and down. "Ah, Mum, yeah, whack." So over time, they end up with all these huge keloid scars on their shoulders. So that's in that particular area. Now, 500 miles due north is the Sepik. And this is what happens in the Sepik area when the boys, young boys, are going through initiation. So they'll get covered in white clay, head to foot in white clay. And the men, these men here are the senior men in the area, and they'll start to incise the skin with the design of a crocodile. Now they just cut very, very little nicks in the backs of the skin, and because they've got all the clay on them, the clay actually goes into the nicks. And as a result of that, all those little nicks that they've got on them turn into keloid scars. And as a result of that, this is what they end up looking like. And this is still happening today. So instead of tattoos, they've got all these keloid scars that show the design of the crocodile. And this young lad here is really proud of his initiation scars. Now the other day, somebody bumped into me and said, "Oh, what about the mudmen?" Well, this is a mudman with his helmet on. I found these pictures on my hard drive, and they were taken in 2017, I think it was. Now, these mudmen are covered with white clay again. I've got these clay helmets. It's a different one. They only started wearing these mud helmets in 1957 because the patrol officers decided to get all of the different tribes together, and as a peacekeeping effort, they said, well, let's all get together, and we'll have a big dance, a big celebration, and we'll adjudicate who's got the best designs and things like that, and everybody will be happy. So this group of people from Asaro in the Eastern Highlands, they had nothing. They had no feathers, they had nothing. All that they were known for was covering themselves with this white clay, and when they wanted to raid a village or whatever, they'd cover themselves in this white clay, and everybody would think there were ghosts coming to get them, and they'd run away. So this was their shtick, was to cover themselves with white clay. And the patrol officer said, well, we've got to zhuzh this up a bit, folks. How's about making thicker clay around your hair, like a helmet, like a motorcycle helmet? So that was the first thing they did. They covered their hair with that, and it evolved and evolved and evolved. And now these guys are actually students at the Divine Word University in Madang. And when cruise ships go in, they show their artistic talents off in clay making and perform for the tourists. This particular tourist decided to try a helmet on, and it didn't fit. They're heavy. They're really heavy. And they got stuck on my nose. They got flat noses. It was able to slide down quite easily, but it actually got jammed on my nose. So that was, as I say, 2017. What I'd like to do is invite you all back at 2 o'clock to watch a performance by Kiriwina. There's a Papua New Guinean girl. She comes from the Trobriand Islands. You will have seen her in the adult ladies dance, and you might recognise her in this one. So just before 2, go away, get yourselves a cup of coffee, a drink. Morag and I drink flat whites and G&Ts. Come back at 2, and you'll get a 47-minute concert of Kiriwina, and she is absolutely fabulous. Come back and enjoy that. Thanks very much.